And the authorized Bailey, who was Mr. Abbott from the Arkansas State Bank himself, signed the bill of exchange as the Bailey for the bank upon tender to Mr. O'Neill. About 6 weeks later, Mr. Yancey called Barton Butts and said, "Where is my money?" And Barton said, "Excuse me, but I thought you were dealing with Mr. Abbott at the Arkansas State Bank and with Mr. Moore." Barton Butts said, "I don't know anything more about it other than I put you guys together." Mr. Yancey said, "But I haven't got my money." Barton Butts told him, "You better talk to Mr. Abbott at the bank." So Yancey went to Mr. Abbott, and Mr. Abbott called Barton Butts. And he said, "What am I supposed to do?" That's Mr. Abbott speaking. Barton said, "Did you follow the instructions on the page of the instructions for the letter of advice?" Mr. Abbott at Arkansas State Bank said, "Well, not really." Duh, nobody can read printing anymore. Barton asked, "What did you do, Mr. Abbott?" Mr. Abbott said, "I put it through for collection." That's on the public side. Duh, that's not what it said. Barton responded, "That is not what the letter of advice said. This is to be treated the same as a check." Mr. Abbott said, "It's a done deal. I don't know what to do about it now," and he implied the bank would not make any payment to Mr. Yancey. Barton said, "I will call Mr. Yancey." Yancey said, "Well now, I am a personal friend of one of the senators from Arkansas. I am going to talk with him about this." So Yancey called Mr. Abbott, and Mr. Abbott at the bank said, "Why don't you talk to Mr. O'Neill or have the senator talk to Mr. O'Neill?" 2 weeks later, Mr. Yancey called Barton Butts and said, "Yes, I went to my senator friend, and my senator friend mentioned this to Mr. O'Neill." Barton asked Mr. Yancey what Mr. O'Neill said. Yancey said, "It was very interesting. I do not understand this. I sent a copy of the bill of exchange to my senator friend. And as soon as he showed the copy of the bill of exchange to Mr. O'Neill, Mr. O'Neill said, quote, 'Yes, period, I know that document, period. I have it in my possession, period, and only a court order will get it out of my hands, period,' unquote. Mr. Yancey asked Barton, "What does he mean by that?" ? Barton said, quote, "Let me ask you this, period. If you were to write a check, Mr. Yancey, and send it to me, and I took it to my bank and deposited it, and I never saw the check again, Who ends up with it? Question mark in quotation. Yancey said, my bank. Didn't you just get the answer to the question? My bank. Who is Mr. Yancey's bank? No, not Arkansas Bank. They don't have the document. Mr. O'Neill at Treasury. Who is Mr. Yancey's bank on the bill of exchange? Mr. O'Neill. Barton continues and says, quote, does your bank ever return the checks? Question mark. Wouldn't you get them back? And if you looked at them and didn't like them and don't like the signature on them, you could have the bank send them back through. After all, you are the final word here, unquote. Oh, Yancey said. Barton said, yes, Mr. O'Neill just told you a mouthful. He said he had it in his possession and only a court order would get it out. What he is saying is, I have got it. I am the drawee, the bank. I'm the final word here, and I am honoring it. It is not going to leave my hands, unquote. The story is not over in this saga because Mr. O'Neill is no longer the Secretary of Treasury, but his daughter is staying with an attorney whose mother is a friend of Barton Butte's. She has agreed to put Barton together with Mr. O'Neill's daughter. Hopefully, Barton can use his expertise as an investigative reporter to find out what happened when Mr. O'Neill stepped down. There may have been more going on behind the scenes when he quit than you might be aware of. The document from Mr. O'Neill never went back to the Arkansas State Bank. Had it gone back to the Arkansas State Bank, what would that have told you? It was in dishonor and was not being honored. All this has to happen, all that has to happen now in the final end of this story is that Mr. Moore, who now lives in Missouri, is going to get together with Mr. Yancey, and they are going to go to Mr. Abbott at Arkansas State Bank. And they are going to say, look, you have the asset on your books. Now do your ledgering. That's all that needs to be done. Arkansas State Bank has the money as an asset in their bank, or it has the credit for that asset. Who would they have the credit with? Department of Treasury. All they have to do is assign it to the proper account. And Mr. Yancey will have his credit, and Mr. Moore will have his property. And the bank and Mr. Abbott is what is holding it up. How do you force the bank to do the ledgering? In that seminar, they talked about the fact that Winston Stroud, another patriot, has a process an administrative process that you can go through from the notarial protest to the United States Court of Federal Claims and get a judgment. I don't know if they've gone all that place yet, so I'm not going to go there yet. However, one of the things that they talked about, and in another place, I don't have it right in front of me, I'll try to find it this week, is Barton uses the language when he talked to the bank president to tell the bank president how to do his ledgering. And the bank president came back and Barton told him that he has either the asset or the credit. And the bank president said something like, where? We don't have any credits. And Barton Butte said something like, you go through your TTL account, Treasury, Tax, and Loan. And you should have the credits on the Treasury, Tax, Loan account because the bill of exchange that went to O'Neill at Treasury, the instructions clearly state that if the bank has no notice of a dishonor within a certain period of time, and I think the window is like 20 days, 10 or 20 or 15 days, that according to the instructions, the bank and the TTL account is supposed to credit themselves the amount of the BOE as though they had posted a credit to Treasury. Then they are to debit the liability account. I don't know if I'm using the correct terminology as far as CPAs are concerned. But they could debit the amount that, see, ordinarily banks get deposits from corporations that are paying withholdings to the Treasury from their employees and everybody else. And so if like your company puts a check in there for the withholdings for your employees, like Ford Motor, the bank might get a deposit of $50 million that's supposed to be transferred from Treasury, and they took that out of the Ford Motor account when the check was written on the deposit to the bank to pay their taxes. Now, it's still solely within the bank just by ledgering. Now, if the bank has tendered this bill of exchange to Treasury, let's say for $1 million, and within the appropriate time they've got no notice of dishonor, that means Treasury has honored that bill of exchange that was tendered to Treasury. So they should have a credit for $1 million based upon what's been made available through the bill of exchange that was sent up there to O'Neill. It was not dishonor. Which means that the bank can apply $1 million in credit because it's already tendered that to Treasury. And so with that $1 million that went up to Treasury, which was paid for by your exemption, so Treasury is out of balance, they keep the BOE to keep their books in balance. The bank sent them $1 million, so they take $1 million credit, and out of the $50 million Ford gave them, they only have to use $49 million to Treasury plus the $1 million on the BOE, which was not dishonored, and the extra $1 million goes into a bank suspense account, which then can be used to put in Yancey's account to pay him the $1 million on the draft that came from Abbott or whoever, okay, but for more. You understand what's going on? So all that has to be done is the ledgering within the bank's books, and everything will come out balanced and even. Because what's happening right now is the bank president's sitting there going, gee, I don't get it. I didn't get any money back from Treasury. And when he talked to Barton, Barton Butte says, you use the TTL account. And the bank president says, no, you don't understand. We can't take anything out of the TTL account. If we take anything out of the TTL account, we'll go straight to jail. And Barton's going, no, you don't understand. You're not removing anything from the TTL account. You're putting it in. Plus accepting the million credit, which isn't taking anything out. It's already been tendered. And the bank president goes, oh, I get it. Duh. Was he really that stupid or not? Now understand, Barton Butte was not testifying for his own tender. He was a third-party witness testifying for someone else. It wasn't his accounts and it wasn't his collection. So he was not going into a dishonor. But he was showing the accounting scheme for what was happening in this process. Okay? Now, I want to put everybody on notice that Barton Butte has come out with a notice here in about the last 2 weeks of August and informed everyone that they are no longer advocating the kinds of bills of exchange or process that they were using. Not that they're per se wrong, but Barton said that we were spending so much time and effort to go back on the process and justify to the bankers and the third parties what was going on, and it was hardly worthwhile. So Barton said by the end of the year they will be teaching an alternative process. They believe it's not the concept that's wrong. It's trying to understand the procedure between the public and the private to stay in honor. And what it appears to be involving is it would appear as though any process that you're using with asset money type instruments today, if it's going to interface I'll call it the private part of the public, the corporations, the stores, anyone outside of government, anyone outside of IRS, state tax collections, those kind of people. If you're going to be interfacing these third parties, it appears as though what is necessary is to develop a process which is going to involve most likely the ACH system, which is the accounting system whereby it's the clearing houses that are going to look at drafts and instruments tendered. And if you've been any place out in the world of commerce today, you will find out that all of commerce is drifting in the direction of any tenders for any widgets or any goods or any services are moving steadily in the direction of the electronic processing. They're not going to take a check and put the paper through per se anymore. You go out and you want to buy goods by check, you can write your check, and what they do is take the check, they'll process it electronically, instantaneously, and give you back your paper check. You don't even need that paper anymore. And when they do that, it's being approved by the clearing houses, the ACH systems. And it would appear as though any process we're going to use to remain on the asset side is going to have a corresponding administrative process to get the approval of the ACH system in what you're doing. That way it will be totally transparent. No one in the world of the commercial system will have any clue as to which side of the fence you are on, the asset side or the liability side. It will either be cleared through the ACH because you've pre-cleared it, or it won't be cleared at all. Once again, the system is not doing this to destroy you. It's doing this so that you got to get it right. You're either going to be all right or you're not going to get through. And the system is bending over backwards to try to get you to understand what you need to do it right. Hence, the notice of deficiency from the court to this lunatic who is attempting desperately to do it right by, quote, not contracting with an illusion. And he's got the whole process backwards because he cannot think backwards in a mirror, which Scripture told you it's all backwards through the mirror. If you cannot look at this process that the public side is mirrored backwards, and you try to do it forward, which he's trying to do, he will be caught up by trying to loosen his wooden yoke, and he's going to get it substituted for an iron yoke very quick, and that's very sad. So Lord willing, we'll be back here next week and continue on with our studies.